How to create an emotional and understandable voice for dubbing videos in English. Life hack from Nikita. I'm sure many of you are looking for that voice that would be emotional and understandable for the American audience. How do you create such a voice if you don't understand the preferences of Americans? Here's my method. I search for a popular YouTube channel on a topic I'm interested in. If the channel has a lot of views, that means YouTube is actively showing its videos. If YouTube is showing videos, it means it has a high audience retention rate. When I find such a channel and make sure I like the voiceover and the comments don't complain about the voiceover, I take action. 1. I download the audio track from the video without background music. 2. I correct the audio, reducing the duration to 1.52 minutes. 3. I use 11 Labs service to upload a voice sample. 4. Having written the text, I do the voiceover. 5. Done. If you find a really good voice, the voiceover will be very cool. The main thing? To choose a quality source. Be sure to pay attention to the number of views on the video from which you take the sound. By the way, my friend from California listened to several examples of such a voiceover and said that everything is fucked up. No accent, perfect pronunciation. If you can, look for videos with professional voiceover and pure American accent. Good luck with that. June Clausen and I, Brian Walters, got married right out of college after a 3-year romance. Although we graduated the same year, I was 3 years older than June because I had served in the Peace Corps for 2 years before going to college. Although both families were happy with our choice of partner, perhaps the happiest was my mother-in-law, Cheryl. Cheryl was especially happy because not only did she seem to like me, but my affair with June and our subsequent engagement, wedding planning, and wedding allowed her to vicariously experience it all in a way that she had never had that experience herself. Cheryl became pregnant as a teenager and found it very difficult to become a single mother, largely because her devoutly religious parents essentially disowned her. A few years later, when she was 21, she married a much older man just to have some financial security to provide for June. Cheryl never had romance, a full engagement, or even anything more than a small wedding, as her husband Sam Clausen had been married before and wanted something simple. Sam is a decent guy and took good care of Cheryl and June, but he was as boring as stagnant water and romantic as a doorknob. I, in turn, always liked Cheryl. Since she's only 11 years older than me, I don't really look at her as a typical mother-in-law, more like a young aunt. In fact, she is as pretty as her daughter, although she is 3 inches shorter than June, has green eyes instead of blue, and is not as sensual. Her beautiful face usually has a dazzling smile on it, and she is very kind. For a beautiful girl like her, she is shy and always wears conservative clothes. Perhaps this is ingrained in her because of her past. June and I had been married for 4 years when Sam died of a heart attack. It wasn't really a surprise because of his lifestyle, but Cheryl took it hard. I handled all of Sam's estate matters for Cheryl, gave her a shoulder to cry on, and even more than June, included her in our lives so that combined with the charity work she was doing, Cheryl would stay busy. The one thing she didn't want help with, or even discuss, was that she didn't go on dates. There were literally dozens of guys I knew, some much younger, who would like to date her, but she had no interest. Shortly after my 6-year wedding anniversary, I realized that I was in the standard situation of an ignorant husband who cheats a treacherous wife. I may have been ignorant, but I was not indecisive. When June's infidelity was confirmed, I moved out of our apartment into an extended stay motel and immediately divided all of our finances. I believe that June really loved me, but she lost her way and didn't consider her short-term affair with someone she supposedly had no emotional attachment to as serious. She accused me of overreacting. I know that June confided in Cheryl. I never called her mom or anything like that, just Cheryl, and asked her to stand up for her. I know this because 3 days after I moved out of our apartment, Cheryl visited me at an extended stay motel. When she knocked on the door, I was surprised to see her, but considering how kind she had always been to me and how much I liked her, I invited her in. We sat down on the sofa next to each other and she took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Brian. I think you know that I didn't raise June that way." "I know, Cheryl," I replied, squeezing her hand. "You have always struck me as a moral person. You have overcome bumps in life's path, and June's actions have nothing to do with you." "How are you holding up?" she asked with a tear in one eye. "I'm fine. It was a shock, but I've never been indecisive, so I took the bull by the horns and moved out. I'll probably be in pain for a long time, but I'll get through it." "Is there a chance that you can forgive June and take her back?" "I don't understand how to do this, especially since she thinks I'm overreacting." It never occurs to her how much she offended me. This time there was a tear in my eye. We talked for an hour, and not only about June, but also about other things. When she stood up to leave, she hugged me, longer than she should have, considering that she was still my mother-in-law, and as soon as she broke contact, she said seriously, looking into my eyes, "I hope that your divorce from June will not mean your divorce from me. Cheryl, there will always be a place in my heart for you." I felt better after Cheryl left. In defending her daughter's interests, she confirmed that I have the right to feel the way I do, did not try to pressure me, and acted like a true friend, not like a mother-in-law. That is, I felt better until I went to bed that night. I woke up sweating from a very, very inappropriate dream. I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences a week after I moved out of our apartment and notified my landlord that I was no longer responsible for rent. June was very upset. I couldn't understand why she was so upset. What she thought I should have done. She had known me for 9 years at that point, and I had never misrepresented myself to her in any way. June and her lawyer tried a variety of tactics, including seeking counseling, so things didn't go smoothly for the first 3 months. At that time, I was in some shock, but did not deviate from my principles. I probably would have taken it harder if 2 of my single male friends hadn't taken it upon themselves to encourage me. And Cheryl called me every week not just to see how I was doing, although she always expressed concern on this subject, but also with inspiring stories, mainly from her charity work. We also had lunch once a month, and at that time she was always in high spirits. Documentation rested about 3 months, and then at 1 o'clock on Monday, we had a preliminary hearing before the magistrate. June requested counseling, but my lawyer was able to successfully refute this by showing photos of June going to lunch with George at least twice since the divorce papers were filed. George was the same co-worker she was having an affair with. While she insistently and tearfully stated that she had not had any sexual contact with him since I left, the fact that she had not distanced herself from him caused a judge to deny her request for involuntary counseling. Everyone present at the hearing knew that this was likely the death knell for a marriage that would likely end in 3 months. On Tuesday, Cheryl called at work. It was unusual for her to call me at work, but I was always happy to hear from her. After the initial exchange of pleasantries, she got down to business. "You can probably guess, Brian, that June called me yesterday after the hearing, very upset, because it looks like the divorce will take place in a few months. Do you think so too?" "Yes, Cheryl, that's true. I'm very sad about this, but I have to move on. My lawyer believes that we can properly resolve all monetary issues, so a final decision is expected in about 3 months. I thought you might be sad, so let me invite you to dinner on Friday. It wouldn't be humiliating for you to go out to dinner with your soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, would it? If you feel uncomfortable, I can wear a mask." I managed to chuckle at this. "No, that would be nice, and no, you don't have to wear a mask. I just don't think I'll be very good company. I'll feed you good food and you'll feel better. I know you're not a very good cook. So what time should I pick you up on Friday?" I chuckled because not a very good cook was more of a compliment. "I'll pick you up or meet you at a restaurant." "No way, I'm the one treating you. Don't argue. I'll pick you up. Say at 7 p.m. "Okay, I agree." On Tuesday evening, I had another very disturbing dream. I'll have to see a psychiatrist if they continue. To my shock, not surprise, but shock, when Cheryl knocked on my apartment door at 7:02 p.m. on Friday, she was not wearing the conservative clothes she always wore. She was wearing a stylish low-cut blouse, a short skirt, 3-inch heels to match the skirt, light makeup, she hardly ever wears makeup, that brought out her captivating emerald green eyes, and a new hairstyle that made her pretty face even more beautiful. She certainly didn't look 43, more like 30. Cheryl stared at me with worry on her face. "Wow, you dressed so nicely," I said, as my jaw started working again. "Thank you," she replied, clearly relieved by my words. "The restaurant is quite upscale, and I didn't want to look like I didn't belong there. What is this? A new outfit?" Yeah, I bought it and a few other things this week. I thought it was time to stop wearing the old-fashioned clothes I always wore." Cheryl went to a restaurant, which, as it turned out, also had a dance floor. Unfortunately, while she was driving, her skirt rode up to her thigh. I had never seen her thighs before and chastised myself for thinking, "Looks slim." The dinner was enjoyable, and Cheryl's upbeat demeanor was contagious, so I almost forgot about the messy divorce. However, it was unusual how Cheryl drank alcohol. She usually only drinks 1 glass of wine when she goes out to dinner. This evening, she bought a bottle for 2, but since I rarely drink and only had 1 glass, she finished the rest. After dinner, she lured me onto the dance floor. The only times I danced with her were at June's reception and wedding, and a couple of nights after Sam's death when June and I took her out. She was turning down a lot of other guys' offers to dance at the time. She was a rather simple, sedate dancer. Now she was a firecracker. After 6 or 7 dances, we took a break. She went to the ladies' room, and I took a table. When she returned, I asked, "How did you learn to dance like that?" I pride myself on being a good dancer, for a guy, but she was clearly better than me. "I've been taking lessons once a week for almost the entire last year," she smiled. "Did I do everything okay?" "You were close to being the best dancer there, and you certainly had your eye on a lot of guys." I grinned. "Oh, I didn't do that." She blushed. Just at that moment, as if on cue, a guy came up to us and asked me if I would mind if he danced with my couple. A little taken aback, I realized that the way Cheryl looked, people could easily mistake her for my date. When I regained my composure, I said, "It depends on my mother-in-law." He looked very embarrassed. Cheryl slapped my hand and said with a smile, "He is joking. However, since this is only our second date, I don't want to disappoint him, especially in case some hot young thing snatches him up. So, thank you very much for your invitation, but I decline it. However, if he leaves me, I'm sure I'll see you here again." She laughed, placing her left hand on mine. The guy smiled, then kissed her right hand and left. "You're a cute little devil," I told her. At that moment, the waiter came to our table and put something that looked like a Bloody Mary in front of her and a soda in front of me. "We didn't order," I began to say when she interrupted me. "I ordered it on the way back. Now have a drink, and then let's get back to the dance floor." I'd never seen her drink hard liquor, but she made quick work of the Bloody Mary, and I finished my soda, and we headed back to the dance floor. After another 5 or 6 dances, Cheryl leaned over to me and said, "I think I've reached my limit, both in terms of alcohol and in terms of dancing. Will you take me home? I shouldn't drive. Maybe I'm drunk. I don't know because I've never been drunk before. But I'm sure I won't be able to drive the car without hitting something." I took the car from the valet while Cheryl went to the powder room again and then drove to her house. She lived in a small, elegant house in a nearby, rather fashionable suburb. Sam had left her quite a significant amount of money, which is about 8 miles from my apartment. I can just take a taxi to go home. Cheryl was very chatty in the car, repeating several times. I chalked it up to drinking, that she hoped I had a good time and forgot about her cheating daughter for a while. When we got to her house, she was fumbling with her garage keys. I took them from her and opened the door, then helped her in. Once she was inside, she closed the garage door and firmly slid the deadbolt. She then pulled something out of her purse and handed it to me. "I took this off in the bathroom as a souvenir for you," she giggled. These were her panties. I'm sure I blushed, but it was nothing compared to what came next. After she handed me her panties and I silently opened and closed my mouth, I was stunned, and she suddenly dropped her skirt. When I say, What are you talking about? She literally tore off her blousie, unbuttoning the buttons and revealing her bra underneath. I'm sure I was crimson. I always imagining that under her old-fashioned clothies there was a beautiful body, but she actually had an amazing body that made all the women in the world jealous. Cheryl came up to me and, covering my shoulders, neck, and cheeks with short kisses, continued to mutter something. I don't think I remember or understand all the words she muttered. I've been sexually frustrated for decades, and I need you to do something about it. As soon as Cheryl put her hands on the tent in my pants, I lost my composure. As I carried her into the bedroom, I remember that the first thought in my head was that in the morning I'll regret it about it. I was physically and emotionally exhausted. There was no way I could get up and leave, especially given her words, "Please stay the night, Brian." I've never woken up with someone I loved before. Love? What the fuck? I had to put that statement on the back burner for a while. As she laid her head on my shoulder, I quickly fell into a deep sleep. I know that I had several erotic dreams during the night. I usually don't remember dreams, but this time I remembered them the next morning. They all had to do with me making love to Cheryl. My last dream turned out to be a reality. In the morning, I felt activity below the waist. I suddenly realized that this was reality and not a dream. "Thank you for the best night and morning of my life," Cheryl said, and her enchanting green eyes glared into mine with the force of a laser. We had a pleasant conversation. Pleasant because I hadn't really gotten into sex with my mother-in-law yet, but I knew that eventually it would be like the sword of Damocles hanging over my head. Finally, she smiled and said, "Let's take a shower together," followed by a quick kiss. "Sounds tempting," I replied, but just before I started to roll out of bed, she grabbed me and said with tears in her eyes, "I'm sorry I told you that I love you." Since it was our first time dating, I got the distinct impression that this was her first time showering with a man, and she was excited. Cheryl was wearing only a short robe as she prepared breakfast. She literally sang to herself, and did it with a smile plastered on her face. We had a nice chat over breakfast, and she looked so charming and happy. In fact, with the exception of my wedding in June, I think it was the happiest I've ever been. After breakfast, I insisted that she get dressed while I washed the dishes. She changed into denim shorts, another nice blouse, and casual flats, and I was again struck by how young she looked and how wide her hips were. She took me to my apartment, and when we got there, she asked, "Maybe you can show me your apartment? I've never seen it." "Of course," I answered. She seemed a little worried at first, but I couldn't tell for sure. Then, when we got to the bedroom, it didn't take long since the apartment wasn't that big. She sighed heavily and put her hands on my chest. "Brian, would you please have sex with me in your bed?" she asked timidly, moving her hands from my chest down. Somehow, the combination of her vulnerability, how sweet she was, how great the sex was in her house, turned me into an animal. Fortunately, I took off her clothes without tearing them. My shirt buttons and boxers were missing, but that was very acceptable collateral damage. Cheryl whimpered, gasped, squealed, and muttered. I was able to stumble back to my bed and hold Cheryl tightly to me. We lay side by side with smiles on our faces. "Did you like it?" "Yes, of course, but I'm not sure I can take it on a regular basis." "I'm completely exhausted, and I feel like my spine has turned to jelly," she laughed. I massaged her back, and then she massaged mine. We must have been lying in bed for about an hour when she asked, "Am I interfering with your plans for the day?" I guess my plans for the day changed after that night. "Let's go to the cinema tonight." Her smile was as bright as a lit Christmas tree. Instead, "Why don't you come over for dinner and we can watch a movie on my big screen TV?" "Sounds attractive," I chuckled. "When should I come?" "How about 5:30? You can help me cut vegetables. I cook a terrible roast." After Cheryl left, I took a moment to reflect. What the fuck are you doing? I asked myself. This is your damn mother-in-law. How much this would suck, not to mention the impact it would have on her relationship with her daughter if June ever found out. Besides, she might already be in love with you, and do you really want to hurt her even though she is the best woman you have ever met in your life." Thinking about this last statement made me cover my face with my hands and mutter, "Oh shit, and you dream about her." After my thoughts remained in turmoil for the next half hour, I finally decided to throw the can on the road. I'll swim downstream this weekend and come to some conclusion later." The competing factions in my brain finally agreed. Throwing the can on the road really made for a great weekend. We had fun cooking dinner together on Saturday night. We watched half of the movie before having sex on the couch in her office. We actually made love in her bed. On Saturday night, we went to the health club she is a loyal member of to work out late Sunday morning. And in the afternoon, we went hiking in the nearby wilderness. Before we left, we had sex in the woods in the back seat of my car, not caring how sweaty we were. We also had the strength to make love on Sunday evening in her bed. When I woke up on Monday morning, I was the most serene I've ever been in my life. This calm was shattered shortly after breakfast when Cheryl asked if we could talk before I left for work. "Brian, could you please listen to what I have to say before you answer or ask questions?" she asked in a timid voice. "This is really hard for me, and I should just say what I planned without interrupting." "Okay." I smiled, squeezing her hands. After a long sigh, she started and didn't stop for 15 minutes, barely breathing. She was so tense, and not stumbling over her words, but expressing herself completely clearly. Her first words were, "I loved you from the first meeting, and you are the only man I have ever loved." After explaining this, she went on to say that she knew that a long-term relationship with me was impossible because she was 11 years older. Her relationship with June would be ruined. She would never be able to give me the children I wanted, and she knew that I could never love her the way she loved me. In conclusion, she said, "However, I will accept everything I can get from you. I will always be available to you." I was stunned. I was silent while she spoke. When she finished, she said, "Go to work. Sorry for taking so much time you picked up." I kissed her passionately. Then I looked into her enchanting eyes and said, "I have a lot to think about. Please don't be upset if we don't see each other for a couple of weeks. Although I'm usually a decisive person, this weekend has completely turned my brain around, and I need to organize it." She smiled, gave me a quick kiss on the lips, stood up, picked me up, and then playfully pushed me out the door. I wasn't exaggerating when I said my head was a mess. Over the next 2 weeks, whenever my mind wasn't completely occupied with work or some other activity, it turned to Cheryl, June, sex, and anxiety. It didn't help that almost every night I dreamed of Cheryl and how I made love to her, traveled with her to exotic places, cuddled up to her, and in one disturbing dream, we had a dozen children with her. Until I saw Cheryl, I called her every day, just to chat for 5 or 10 minutes. She never pressured me or became serious during our phone conversations, except she casually said that the last time she saw her daughter, June, asked if she was seeing anyone because "You look the happiest I've ever seen you, Mom." Cheryl simply remained silent. 2 weeks later, I invited Cheryl to dinner on Saturday night. She happily agreed. Although I didn't really plan it, I was just trying to figure out how compatible we were outside of bed. I ended up staying the night in her bed and making love twice. I knew I was really falling in love with her, but because of the 11-year age difference, and mainly because she was still my mother-in-law, I couldn't muster my usual determination. Our relationship at least survived the final divorce. After that, Cheryl took June on a week-long cruise. When Cheryl returned, she said that the cruise had helped June a lot, and that her anger towards me for throwing her to the curb had diminished and almost completely disappeared, and that June seemed to understand that it was to blame you, only need yourself. "Did she ask about your love interest?" I asked. After a long pause, Cheryl answered, "Yes. So how is it?" Another long pause followed. I said that I was happy, that I didn't know if I would have a long-term relationship, and that I had no plans to introduce her to a guy in the near future. My indecisiveness could have continued for many more months, even years, if a catastrophic event had not occurred. I correctly concluded that I loved Cheryl and we were together at least 3 evenings a week and talked on the phone every day. Even though I loved being married to June for over 5 years, if I'm honest with myself, my relationship with Cheryl was much better than my relationship with June. Yes, despite her age, Cheryl had been sexually inexperienced the first night we spent together, but now she was not only experienced, but as expressive, loving, adventurous, and energetic as can be. The catastrophic event hit me when Cheryl called me at the office early Friday afternoon. That evening, we had plans to go to a play and then, of course, to play hide-and-seek in bed that night. She was in tears and begged me to come to her house as soon as possible. I was able to get to her house a little after 3 p.m. When Cheryl opened the door, it was obvious that she was crying and immediately ran into my arms. I let her cry on my shoulder for a few minutes and then carried her to the living room couch. "Okay, tell me what's going on," I said, holding her hands. "I swear I didn't plan for this," she sobbed, and then continued in sentence fragments like, "I didn't know this was possible. Please don't hate me. You can just leave." I had no idea what she was talking about. I finally calmed her down, squeezed my hands, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Stop. Tell me what's on your mind. I have no idea what you're talking about." She sniffed, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm 7 weeks pregnant." This was news to me. We talked to her about this before, and she was sorry that she couldn't get pregnant because she knew that I wanted children. She tried with Sam, but it didn't work out. And before that, some doctor had told her after she gave birth to June years ago that for some reason she no longer remembered she probably wouldn't be able to get pregnant again. Since I was stunned, I didn't say anything for a while, but I'm sure my eyes widened. Cheryl took this to mean that I was upset and would probably throw her overboard, and she started crying so hard that I thought there might be a medical emergency. "Go to work. Sorry for taking so much time you picked up." I kissed her passionately. Then I looked into her enchanting eyes and said, "I have a lot to think about. Please don't be upset if we don't see each other for a couple of weeks. Although I'm usually a decisive person, this weekend has completely turned my brain around, and I need to organize it." She smiled, gave me a quick kiss on the lips, stood up, picked me up, and then playfully pushed me out the door. I wasn't exaggerating when I said my head was a mess. Over the next 2 weeks, whenever my mind wasn't completely occupied with work or some other activity, it turned to Cheryl, June, sex, and anxiety. It didn't help that almost every night I dreamed of Cheryl and how I made love to her, traveled with her to exotic places, cuddled up to her, and in one disturbing dream, we had a dozen children with her. Until I saw Cheryl, I called her every day, just to chat for 5 or 10 minutes. She never pressured me or became serious during our phone conversations, except she casually said that the last time she saw her daughter, June, asked if she was seeing anyone because "You look the happiest I've ever seen you, Mom." Cheryl simply remained silent. 2 weeks later, I invited Cheryl to dinner on Saturday night. She happily agreed. Although I didn't really plan it, I was just trying to figure out how compatible we were outside of bed. I ended up staying the night in her bed and making love twice. I knew I was really falling in love with her, but because of the 11-year age difference, and mainly because she was still my mother-in-law, I couldn't muster my usual determination. Our relationship at least survived the final divorce. After that, Cheryl took June on a week-long cruise. When Cheryl returned, she said that the cruise had helped June a lot, and that her anger towards me for throwing her to the curb had diminished and almost completely disappeared, and that June seemed to understand that it was to blame you, only need yourself. "Did she ask about your love interest?" I asked. After a long pause, Cheryl answered, "Yes. So how is it?" Another long pause followed. I said that I was happy, that I didn't know if I would have a long-term relationship, and that I had no plans to introduce her to a guy in the near future. My indecisiveness could have continued for many more months, even years, if a catastrophic event had not occurred. I correctly concluded that I loved Cheryl and we were together at least 3 evenings a week and talked on the phone every day. Even though I loved being married to June for over 5 years, if I'm honest with myself, my relationship with Cheryl was much better than my relationship with June. Yes, despite her age, Cheryl had been sexually inexperienced the first night we spent together, but now she was not only experienced, but as expressive, loving, adventurous, and energetic as can be. The catastrophic event hit me when Cheryl called me at the office early Friday afternoon. That evening, we had plans to go to a play and then, of course, to play hide and seek in bed that night. She was in tears and begged me to come to her house as soon as possible. I was able to get to her house a little after 3 p.m. When Cheryl opened the door, it was obvious that she was crying and immediately ran into my arms. I let her cry on my shoulder for a few minutes and then carried her to the living room couch. "Okay, tell me what's going on," I said, holding her hands. "I swear I didn't plan for this," she sobbed, and then continued in sentence fragments like, "I didn't know this was possible. Please don't hate me. You can just leave." I had no idea what she was talking about. I finally calmed her down, squeezed my hands, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Stop. Tell me what's on your mind. I have no idea what you're talking about." She sniffed, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm 7 weeks pregnant." This was news to me. We talked to her about this before, and she was sorry that she couldn't get pregnant because she knew that I wanted children. She tried with Sam, but it didn't work out. And before that, some doctor had told her after she gave birth to June years ago that for some reason she no longer remembered she probably wouldn't be able to get pregnant again. Since I was stunned, I didn't say anything for a while, but I'm sure my eyes widened. Cheryl took this to mean that I was upset and would probably throw her overboard, and she started crying so hard that I thought there might be a medical emergency. My mind suddenly became clearer. I loved her more than I had ever loved anyone before. I really wanted at least one child. I didn't care if she was older than me. The time had come to make a decision, and the decision was clear. I took her face in both hands and wiped away the tears with my thumbs. "Stop crying, Cheryl. I want to ask you something." After repeating this about a dozen times, she finally stopped. I asked, "Will you make me the happiest person in the world and marry me?" Obviously, she didn't take it right away because I had to ask 2 more times before she understood my words, smiled, and screamed, "Yes!" Her tears dried up. We clung to each other. I told her how much I loved her. She told me that she had been the happiest woman for the last 6 months and was even happier now. Suddenly, we heard the front door open and, "Mom, are you here?" We looked like scared rabbits when we turned towards the sound and saw June enter the living room. She was just as amazed as we were. June spoke first. "What are you doing here, Brian?" I couldn't answer. Suddenly, Cheryl said words that I'm sure she didn't mean to say at that moment. "I'm 7 weeks pregnant with Brian's baby, and we're getting married." A light smile appeared on June's face. Apparently, she thought it was a joke at first. When she saw how big my eyes were and saw my intimate embrace with Cheryl, the smile disappeared, and her eyes began to glaze over. I immediately jumped up and caught her before her head hit the floor. I picked June up and carried her to the sofa that Cheryl had just vacated. Cheryl jumped into action. She took out some smelling salts and a cold compress. Before using them, she turned to me and said, "I think it would be better if you left before she came to her senses." Then she asked with a smile, "Can we go shopping for wedding rings tomorrow?" "Of course," I answered, kissing her deeply. "I will give tickets to today's performance to a friend. Just call me at what time I should pick you up tomorrow." We kissed again, and I left. I actually gave my tickets to a friend and his wife, who were happy to receive them, and I even babysit their kids as practice. We didn't go ring shopping on Saturday. Cheryl called me around noon and told me that June was staying the night, and that it would probably take them the rest of the weekend to get everything sorted out. I couldn't argue with her. I told her I loved her, and we would go shopping when we could. "Hopefully it will be on Monday," she chuckled before hanging up. I certainly don't know everything Cheryl and June talked about. What I do know is that Cheryl loved June as much as a mother can love an adult child, despite June's mistake with George, and that June and Cheryl were a team for many years before I met them. Cheryl told me that she was completely honest with June about her long-term feelings for me, that she never had any romantic or sexual contact with me until she knew for sure that my marriage to June was over. Cheryl said she understood how awkward our marriage would be for June, but Cheryl needed June in her life just as much now as she ever did. I have to give June credit. While she herself was sad about the situation, she was happy for her mother, who she knew had never had true love before and was glad to have a younger sister or brother. Although June and I had no plans to be friends in the future, I made it clear to her that I bore her no ill will, that I would always treat her with respect, and that I didn't do anything to hurt her. I just couldn't help but fall in love with her. Cheryl. The only problem we had, if you can call it that, was that pregnancy increased Cheryl's already high libido. I need to make up for 2 decades without real sex. That's how she put it. And who am I to object? We continued to do this steadily until we were 8 months and a week pregnant, when we had to put it on hold until 2 months after our beautiful little girl, Alicia, was born. Cheryl and I got married in a simple ceremony 2 months before Alicia was born. We showed June maximum respect. She was a bridesmaid. Although I had completely forgiven June, my approach to George, her lover, with whom, according to Cheryl, June never had sex again after I began divorce proceedings, was different. I followed him electronically and, even from time to time for a day or two, with the help of a private investigator. When I found out he was getting married, I sent his fiancée a complete dossier about his relationship with June while she was married to me and how it ruined our marriage. I was pleased to see that George's fiancée left him within a week of receiving my letter, and he soon moved to another city. After Alicia was born, we decided that we would like her to have a sibling. However, we did not consider another pregnancy for Cheryl, and immediately after Alicia, desirable and safe. Since Sam left her a lot of money, we collected one of her eggs and fertilized it with my sperm in the laboratory and hired a surrogate mother. When Alicia was 15 months old, the surrogate gave birth to our second child, a little boy we named Aaron. Both children are now 5 and 6 years old. I'm more in love with Cheryl than ever. I never imagined that a relationship could be so good and that we would be able to maintain our sexual relationship with the intensity that we have. One more thing. June married a guy Cheryl and I like, and she's due to give birth to a little girl next month. For some time, I tried to figure out what kind of relationship her daughter would have with our children. I gave up. All I know is that Cheryl will love her granddaughter just as much as she loves our children. Cheryl seems to have an endless capacity to love. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one.